with ChessFrog OmniVersity. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Today's topic: race, identity, and unity. How do we in the 21st century bring ourselves back to the empowerment we felt and the strength that we felt in the times back during the civil rights movement, back at the end of slavery, and in other times in our histories? It seems like right now there is a disunity in our community and a lack of consistent identity in our community. How do we address that issue? That's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get started, let's hit a few key terms that a lot of people misunderstand. You have the concept of race. What is race? Race is a social dynamic. Race is a social creation. You talk to any scientist, and they will tell you that humans are more alike than they are not alike. You will find humans with curly hair in parts of Northern Europe. You will find humans with dark skin in parts of China. You will find any type of characteristic that you associated with one group of people, whether it be the texture of their hair, the thickness of their lips, the shape of their nose. You will find incidents of that characteristic inside other communities. So this concept of race that we bandy about as some type of thing that separates us really doesn't separate us. But socially, not scientifically, socially, it does. With that being said, we have to also take into account history when we start talking about race, identity, and these things. And when we start talking about that, we need to start defining other terms. We throw the word racism around a lot and saying this person is racist, that person is racist. From a social science point of view, racism is the power to inflict penalties or rewards upon a group of people. If you are a group of people who are not empowered, this is where that argument comes in. Can a black person be racist? If that black person is empowered like Oprah, maybe. But if you're the average run of the Joe guy walking up and down the street, you don't have the power as a black person to hire and fire and to make wide scale social decisions that impact a whole group of people. If you're someone like Henry Ford, then you can impact whole groups of people by saying, I'm going to pay everyone the same amount of money. That's a historic fact. When Henry Ford did that, migration amongst African Americans shot up to northern areas, northern factories, including Flint and Detroit, saying, hey, we're getting equal pay. They're paying us the same much as a white man. We're on the road to equality. So racism, as we're going to use it inside this conversation, is the ability to have power to inflict either a penalty or reward upon people, whether that penalty is forcing them to live in certain neighborhoods with redlining or other things. That's what we're going with for a definition of racism. Now, discrimination, on the other hand, anybody can discriminate. I don't want these type of people in my house. I don't want this type of person dating my daughter. You get into that, we start talking about how people treat each other. Discrimination is when you actively make a decision to say that I'm not going to hire a woman for this job, or I'm not going to hire a black person for this job, or I'm only going to hire people of my religion for this job. Let's hit one more term and then get into a deeper conversation. Prejudice. What is prejudice? Prejudice has a bad name, but we all participate in it. There are these social scientists, these social scientists. You got Piaget, you got Vygotsky, and they will tell you that the way that we naturally learn things is based on these things called schemes and schemas. When you tell a child that thing up in the sky flying, it's called a bird, that child says, in their mind, everything that flies is a bird. So when they see an airplane, they say, hey, Dad, look, a bird. They say, no, son, that's not a bird. That's an airplane. Until we adjust those schemes and schemas inside of our mind, we are prejudiced. Let's go on further with that. Sometimes there are traumatic events in our life. If you get attacked by a dog at a young age, you might have a fear of dogs all of your life. If you associate certain things the way that America presents them, then you will develop certain mindsets, certain schemes and schemas. It is impossible. And this is why some people want to laugh when someone says, well, I'm not racist, well, I'm not sexist. It's impossible to be raised in American culture with magazines, television, commercials, social interaction, sports, and not hold or harbor some sexist thoughts or some racist thoughts. They're in there. And for you to say, I'm not racist, is to deny a part of you, and it makes people automatically think, not only are you racist, you're lying about it. So it's not a bad thing to hold some types of racist thoughts or discrimination. It's a bad thing not to learn and to adjust. Just like a child might think an airplane is a bird, we have to adjust our schemes and schemas and start dealing with people at an individual level or at a particular level. If I live inside of an isolated community where I don't meet black people every day, or black people are a rarity, then the only thing I have to base my knowledge of black people on is movies, sports, and what I hear on the news. Propaganda. So either this black person is going to be passenger 57 and save all our lives, or they're going to be phenomenal at playing basketball, or they're going to try and steal my purse. So I'm going to lock my door and roll up my windows. Because, New Jack City is another thing that creates this popular image, the image of Shaft, the image that we see inside the movies all the time. Once we get past that and realize how we have been, I don't want to say brainwashed, I think it's better to say how we've been acculturated or assimilated to think a certain way. Once we can get past that and say, hey, that's what happened to me. I never spent time with black folks, so I only had this to base it on, and I was wrong because I met this one black guy. He's cool as the day is long. He listens to country music also, and we have so much in common. You have situations also where the first black family to move inside of an isolated town in Colorado or South Dakota or one of them little square box states out there, you actually meet a black person for the first time, and you're shocked because they don't eat soul food the way you expected them to. Or they can't play basketball as well as you expected them to. So America has a lot of growing up to do, and race is one of those issues that's touchy and people are sometimes scared to talk about. I'm willing to talk about it. If you got questions, if you got comments, chime in on Facebook, and I will try to respond to your questions and comments as issues come up and if time prevails. But how do I want to focus this on black people, and how do we get some type of unity and some type of identity that we can all agree with? I myself consider myself an Afrofuturist. And what does that mean? I want to see my children in the future. I want to have grandchildren and know that black people will exist 200 years from now and won't be systematically destroyed, annihilated, or washed out by whatever means. Everybody wants this. When you get down to it, all humans want to raise a family. They want to have love, joy, all this. All people want this. The way it gets translated and mutated or distorted by propaganda or by this culture sometimes, it turns into hate. And hate is that thing that causes a man to put a sheet on and burn a cross inside of another man's lawn, or causes a lynch mob to form and causes justice to be perverted. It causes an officer working inside of a black community to fear for his life and want to shoot first, and it also causes that same officer to not shoot someone who is being a danger because of the color of their skin. This is truth, this is fact, this is reality. Things are not balanced, things are not fair, things are not right. we need to try and work towards a more perfect union and try and make things right. And the only way we're going to do that is if people start discussing what they truly feel and how they truly think about each other. Coming from my perspective, which is the only perspective I can come from, I was born and raised in a community where we rarely saw white people. It used to shock me when I would turn on the TV set and see whole gaggles of white people because I never saw them in real life or in my community at a certain point in time. From the time I was in first grade through the time that I was in 8th grade, I never had a classmate who was not black. All my classmates were African American. There were no Latinos. There were no white people. There were no Middle Easterners. Excuse me. It was just 100% black on the west side of Detroit, which is odd because the Brown versus Board of Education decision, which was handed down in the 50s, afforded my father the opportunity to have white classmates and white peers. But when white flight occurred during the late 60s and the early 70s, it took that opportunity away from me and some of my brothers. So it's just kind of an interesting twist on history that my father would have more of an integrated education than I would. It wasn't until I hit high school and went to a magnet school that was the focus in Detroit, Cass Tech, that there were other students of other races that became part of my matriculation. How do we get, as black people, into a shape and a state where we are able to focus and follow one game plan? Martin Luther King had a dream. It's time for us to come up with a plan. Right now, I don't think there's any true black leadership. People who could step into the role or could put themselves in the role are probably not the people that we would want in that role. You have people that have money like Oprah and people that have status like LeBron or Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan. But who do you want to be your leader? Could it be Ice Cube because he represents a certain hip-hop generation? Could it be Denzel Washington because of the way he carries himself, or Morgan Freeman? Do we want anybody from the entertainment or sports industry? Do we want somebody that's already involved in politics? Because it seems to me that once these people get involved with politics, they kind of get usurped by lobbyists and so forth. We have a question and some comments. We have Rest Ream IO, read and reply. Leslie Atkins, I believe there are two emotions, love and fear. Erasing fear within our community is key. Thank you, Leslie, for that comment. I would totally agree that fear plays a heavy and major part in the social reactions that we see from police officers, from white people, from security inside the department store. Coming from a black perspective, yes, I have been followed through a store before. Yes, I have gone out to the parking lot to mind my own business and had people clutch their purses or lock their doors. It has an impact on you when these things happen. That fear of something that's unknown. But is there something wrong with fear? No, fear is a natural reaction. If you're a white person and you're born out in the sticks somewhere and never ran into a black person before, I'd be a little intimidated too if all I know about black people is what I see on the evening news. A black male robbed a gas station with no real description. Or if all I see of black people is what the media portrays or shows, that these are strange and interesting beings with these magical powers in sports and these great powers in music. Alexandra Brown, where are black people supposed to get their identity, get their identity from? You have some that believe we are African, then blacks who believe they have been in America before slavery. That's part of what I'm trying to get to. Right now, we have so many divisions among black people. You got some people that consider themselves Nation of Islam. You can have some people that consider themselves Moabites. You got some people that consider themselves the children of Israel, Judea, and you have other black people that consider themselves this, that, and another thing. We have Africans that are currently immigrating to America legally who are not part of what is called the diaspora. Throwing another word out there, diaspora, diaspora. The diaspora is the collective body of all people who were taken from Africa worldwide. That means that those people in Brazil who were forced into slavery, those people in Mexico who were forced into slavery, or who are the descendants of people who were forced into slavery, are part of that diaspora. That diaspora is in England. That diaspora is in parts of China. There are lots of different places that we were taken to, kidnapped, and sold to. Just like sex trafficking is a major issue today, back then it was trafficking. It was trafficking not just for sex, but for labor also. And believe it or not, there's more slavery today than there was 200 years ago. You can check the facts and the statistics on that. When we start talking about factory labor, when we start talking about work camps, when we start talking about things that are going on in other parts of the world, sometimes you got to check the label and see where them gym shoes were made and see what type of practices were being used. I had an experience once, just to give you an idea of how this stuff goes on. I had an opportunity to visit Egypt. And as part of that visit to Egypt, we went through the pyramids and all that. But we also got to go to a rug factory where they're actually making these rugs. And these kids, literally little kids, were sitting on the floor, weaving and whatnot. And some of these kids had never seen African Americans being, or what they called us over there was Nubians. They never saw Nubians being treated the way we were being treated. So this was an anomaly. Why are these black people that we usually treat like dirt in our country being treated special and being given this tour? So a lot of them were turning their heads and weren't minding the rugs that they're supposed to be putting together. And the treatment they got was a slap on their knuckles with a stick by the foreman that was standing over them. I'm quite sure they were not being paid a substantial working wage. But you have a lot of different situations in this world today where, from the royal families in certain countries being allowed to still hold chattel slavery, to the kidnapping of youth out of Africa to become camel jockeys, to the sex industry in different parts of the world, even in America, even in the United States of America. So there's still slavery that goes on today. But how do we identify ourselves? How do we get some type of sense of unity? How do we put together a collective focused agenda and a collective focused path and plan for the future? I want my children and my grandchildren and other people's children and grandchildren to live well and successfully, but we have to have some type of plan, because there are things out there systematically killing us, whether it be the food that we eat, whether it be the people that are supposed to protect us overreacting to us, whether it be just the social situations where our schools do not prepare us as well as schools prepare other people's children. We need to come up with a plan and come up with a list, an agenda, and a goal for the near future. We need leadership that's going to be sincere and not going to placate or bend over for money. And a lot of times what we're seeing is lobbyists gets the ear of one of our politicians, and all of a sudden it gets gentrified. This is a predominantly black city, but we're slowly being gentrified. I'm not sure if that's by the choice of the citizens here. If you look at what happened in New Orleans, before Katrina, New Orleans was close to 80% black. Now you look at New Orleans, and those numbers have dramatically dropped. I fear the same might happen for Flint. You have an average age of retirees that are holding on to their property, and people not being instructed on how to keep that property and family. Nobody is even talking about family wealth or intergenerational wealth or how to carry things over. So we need to start addressing these issues as African Americans. we need to start addressing these issues as Americans also, because we are a part of this. And I don't see anybody in a rush, even though they claim if such and such gets elected, I'm leaving the country. A lot of people that said that had to chew on their words. I'm not dropping any names, but some famous comedians made that feeling clear, but they're still holding on to their Hollywood homes and so forth. So we're part of this soup that's called America. And sad to say, it is not a melting pot. You have different types of Americans, and you have different opportunities based on what type of American you are. We try and criticize India for having a caste system, previously having a caste system, but we have that same caste system here. It was called the hacienda system under the Spanish, where the lighter you were, the more prestige, the more clout you carried. The darker you were, the lower you fell in the social climbs. If you were Spanish born in Spain, you were at the top of the machine. If you were Spanish, full Spanish blood, but born in Mexico, then you were a little bit lower because you had a slight tan just because of the weather you were exposed to. If you were mixed or mulatto or mestizo or mixed with Indian or mixed with whatever, then depending on your skin shade, you fell somewhere. This same practice was in New Orleans, and to a degree it's in America, but America added another component, that one drop rule. One drop of blood, one drop of African-American blood or African blood makes you Negro. And before then, we had people that were considered Melosian who were given special status. You had people that were considered mulatto that were given special status. It's rumored that Alexander Hamilton was of mixed heritage. It's rumored that Abraham Lincoln was Melosian. It's rumored that other famous people fell into these categories that were allowed white privilege because of the system that was in place before the one drop rule. So, if you have any questions out there, or if there's something that you don't agree with, please chime in and let me know what you're thinking or what your thoughts are. Or if you have questions about why certain things are certain ways, I will try to address it and answer it to the best of my capabilities. All right. We have situations today in America. Black Lives Matters. We have situations today in America. We've had a black president. When I was younger, I didn't think that would ever occur in my life, and I was embarrassed to say that, hey, I had given up hope to a degree that would occur. My way of changing direction was to open a community center and start working for the positive and having that optimistic point of view that things can change, things can get better. But the only way things can change and get better is if people are willing to open their hearts, their minds, and their thoughts to what's really going on. Scientifically, there's no real difference between people of different ethnic backgrounds. It's what we hold on to that creates this quote-unquote racism or this social structure that makes things difficult for some people. And until we're able to let that go or have a better understanding about why the way things are, the way things are, we are going to be still sitting in the same boat. Yes, sir.
So,
I'm sorry. My co-host here, my producer, is the one and only Mr.
George F. Grundy II. So, we're Out of the Mud Media. Please like, share, and subscribe. Out of the Mud, INC, and any platform, all platforms that we're on with Out of the Mud. So, question, when it comes to what you're saying, and how do you structure that? How do you maintain that? And what is the reason, in your opinion, why we haven't been able to do that thus far, being that it's been, 120 or so, 150 years that we've been technically freed on paper?
Well, my personal belief is slavery not only exists in its regular shadow form, but a new form of slavery exists where debt has become that thing that hangs over everyone's head.
Or make it specific to black folk.
Well, make it specific to black folks. You had something that happened after slavery called sharecropping, where no matter how hard you worked, the land still belonged to people that were not black. And you struggled, you worked their land, you were basically in slavery. We need to make it clear that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment did not end slavery. We need to make it clear that the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery. There is a caveat actually written into the amendments that says you cannot enslave people unless they are convicted of a crime. And when you look at what used to be called the chain gangs, and then when you look at the people who rebuilt the South after the war, a lot of them were African Americans doing slave labor because they were accused of crimes or because the way the system was structured, there was no other place for them to go. When you start looking at the current prison complex and how people are profiteering off of it, you see that slavery still exists. Prisoners getting paid 10 cents an hour to do telemarketing calls. Prisoners getting paid X, Y, and Z to do other types of labor that we pay immigrants more for. So we got to be careful when we say slavery ended, because technically,
on paper, in the traditional sense of what it was. So I get what you're saying. You're going to get into nuances, but how do we maintain, and why haven't we been able to maintain since that transition? And then how do we add that into making this unity that you're speaking about real and exist? And is it existing and real, and we're just missing the point, or we're not lined up with the people that have that unity?
Well, when we start talking about unity, we got to start talking about identity. Who are we? And when we start asking ourselves who we are, we have to ask ourselves, what do we believe? We are not all Christians. We are not all conservative. We are not all liberal. We are not all college educated. We are not all blue collar. But we do have certain things that bring us together. We have a collective history, a history of struggle, a history of standing up against a machine that's working against us. Back in the day, post-slavery, we had leadership under the guise of Frederick Douglass. This leader was selected by the government, but Frederick Douglass was better than anybody else. Maybe Harriet Tubman, but that's a different story for a different week. After Frederick Douglass, who winds up marries a white woman and lives an interesting life after the Civil War.
He was married to a black woman first, I believe.
He was married to a black woman first, but he winds up marrying a white woman later.
At the end of his days.
But he leads an interesting life. After that, we get to the era of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Booker T. was of the opinion that we should develop ourselves physically through physical labor and through slow adjustment with white folks so that they can get used to our status increasing. A lot of people were against that. W.E.B. who says, no, we have people that need to be doctors right now, lawyers right now, etc. You had the first kind of fracture in what would become the black community. And it's okay to have a difference of opinion. I like Booker T for certain things and I like W.E.B. for certain things. You come to an era where Marcus Garvey stands up and says, we need to unite, get our own, start shipping ourselves back and forth to this other place, almost like what current Israel is. Marcus Garvey wanted to create a homeland in Africa, but be also able to have a home here in America that we also built. Just like most other people, they have a homeland they can go to. If I'm of Irish descent, I can always go to Ireland. If I'm of Chinese descent, I can always go back to China and visit and come back and forth. If I'm of African descent, it's kind of hard to know where my people actually came from. Some people say that the record still exists by the people who developed some people say that the records still exist by the people that developed the slave trade. Talking to the mic. Okay. Some people say that those records exist, but beyond what you can find out on 23andMe, it's kind of questionable to try and find out and say, hey, I feel like I look like a Mandingo, or I feel like I look like Zulu or whatever. So we are in a weird predicament. There was an attempt to create a homeland for Africans and free slaves. There's a place called Liberia. Liberia is, with Latin root means freedom or means free. Liber, Liber. And the capital of Liberia is Monrovia.
So
Monrovia was created by the United States. It's almost a colony for ex-slaves to go to, but the ideal didn't work out. People didn't like the ideal of shipping people back.
You're taking it across the ocean. I'm talking about right here, right now, and those that didn't have the, because traveling and going somewhere is always a luxury, regardless of what it is. Those that came from Europe to the Americas, it was a luxury because they were the ones that were able to get on, unless they were prisoners that were shipped off that they didn't want, like what happened in Australia. But I'm saying here, we didn't have any luxuries. It was slavery. It was detriment. It was torture. It was
right.
All types of ungodly, unhumane things that were going on with our humanity. So after that, after the deconstruction and reconstruction was happening, why and what is it that we didn't do, or need to do in order to have that unity? We already know as above, so below. And my belief is as above, it's more below, because everything that they put up in the sky, like the cloud, everything about the internet is under the water, under the ground. There's nothing in the sky dealing with the internet, barely, except for so-called satellite. So when it comes to what was done in the sense of us that are considered Moorish, black, African-American, Negro, colored, and such, we don't have the...
I want to read that document. Right, or did you already show the public?
What document? We don't have we don't have the collective understanding of our history, because it's been destroyed and crushed and if you look at the etymologic term of black, it means pale. If you go into the history books and dictionaries, as so above, below, the word black is not black. Everything about how we're being structured as in this term African American is to take us away from the ownership of the land of America in which we live. We're always, the conversation to me going anywhere else is a moot point, because we've been here. Most of us has been here, period. The other things were put in because they understood admiralty and law of the land and universal law. So I'm saying, going back to what I'm saying, what is it that we didn't do, or need to do in order to have that unity? Knowing that we have all these things that separate us and cause us discord, such as meritorious manumission and all these snitching laws and stuff. My thing is, how do we get that thing that you're saying, the unity, and do we have it and we're not following it, or paying attention to those that have set up the procedures and policies and the places in government to be able to do it? And how do we adjust? But you have a comment in here.
All right, I'm going to address that issue, but Miss Michelle says, ain't no lies told. New Jim Crow, after the government put drugs in the black neighborhood, the whole age was to arrest the population. I'm going to say this right here, and it's not a very popular thought. Before desegregation, we had our own stores, our own motels, our own this, that, and the other thing, bars, everything. There was a separate America. There was a white America. There was a black America. There was a black school. There was a white school. Post-segregation, post-desegregation, we lost all that. We moved on up to the east side, so to speak, and we got bamboozled a little bit because we lost all that ability to make money. Black banks, black insurance companies, black this, black that. We lost all that thinking that we were being integrated fully into the system post-civil rights legislation, post-Brown versus Education, and post Johnson civil rights legislation. We thought some people bought in and said, "Hey, we all good. We're integrated. It's all good now. Free love." Yes.
So going off what you're saying, that goes into the argument that you were speaking of W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and Marcus Garvey. So Booker T. Washington, he was like, hey, why are we even thinking a word about these folks? Okay, Jim Crow is Jim Crow, but if we have our own, we have our own.
Right.
And W.E.B. Du Bois was like, hey, let's start this initiative in order to have equal rights and have the ability to be able to immerse in the culture of whatever we want, to have our community and be able to also be a part of their community in senses. While Marcus Garvey was like, look, let's just go home. Let's leave here. Let's go somewhere that's ours, create our own nation and start our own situation. Okay, we know that there was a certain community, and I'm not going to say them. Don't you say their name? that helped W.E.B. Du Bois.
It's sad we can't.
It was founded in assistance and help of a community that has such an issue of people challenging anything that they do, and they helped to destroy Marcus Garvey and his movement. For whatever reasons, they tried to make him a charlatan. They
lied on him. They
tore up his ships and all kinds of stuff. So that construct, and then with W.E.B. Du Bois, he was just an intellectual trying to find a space and a seat for himself and others like him. The Talented 10 came out of constructs that he was into, the Boule and so on. The secret societies of the colored or Negro people came from a lot of things that he was a part of.
They allowed the paper bag test.
All of those things in senses, but with the alignment that he had with those people that helped to significantly raise the awareness of Negroes, also helped to destroy Negroes at the same time.
Here's part of the problem. You have a lot of people that came to America and say, hey, we had it rough when we started here. The Irish had it rough when they first came to America. Italians had it rough when they first came to America. A lot of other people had it rough. Here's what makes us different. We are a stigmatized minority. What do I mean by that? The reason why they chose us to be slaves, part of the reason, from a block away, you can tell if a person is black or white. You can tell whether or not you need to check them for their freedom papers or if they're off the plantation. Being a stigmatized minority, people automatically make assumptions. Now, the average person cannot tell whether or not you are Catholic or Jewish or Protestant or Buddhist if you walk up to them. That's being a non-stigmatized minority because there is no physical thing that says automatically, you got to be African American or you're definitely this, that, or the other thing. Being the stigmatized minority allows America to create this artificial caste system. And if you're going to have people be poor, especially after the Depression, they're going to say, at least we're not as poor as those people over there. But it was us, those people over there, that helped them survive. Taught some of these people how to make collard greens or cornbread or start a lot of Southern food traditions that help people survive. Collard greens are actually a weed that grow next inside the slave quarter and all around the plantation. Some people picked it and ate it. Same thing with dandelion greens. There were a lot of things we brought to the table and brought to this country that made this country different, that gave this country a culture that was different from what you would have in England or in some other place that's homogenized. Getting back to the point, what happened to us? Why are we so fractured right now? Why are we so separated? Number one, we're a stigmatized minority. We stick out like a sore thumb. And people take advantage of that to say, well, if I'm going to oppress somebody, I'd rather oppress somebody that doesn't look like my family. Number two, we have people that became opportunists. In the capitalist world, some people are going to make money. Some people are going to sell out. Some people are going to do a whole bunch of different things that might not be good for the collective group, but good for themselves. Some people moved on up to the east side. Some people left the black community, and it became a ghetto. When you remove all the doctors, and the doctors are allowed to live inside the white community, the lawyers are allowed to live inside the white community. When all the black people of college education or of higher standing or people who have good factory jobs move out of a community, what's left there? It's almost like a centrifuge effect. You're pulling everything out of there that makes money, and you're left with a community of people that are stuck. The point is, there are reasons why we are fractured right now. And some of those reasons go back to the 60s. Some of those reasons go back to the 1600s. Right now, what we need to do is say, hey, I'm worried about my son being killed by the police. I'm worried about the housing in my neighborhood and making sure that my neighborhood gets this lead abatement or gets this different things right now. I'm worried about a lot of different things that affect my community and may not be on the agenda of the president or the agenda of mainstream America. Not to be, quote unquote, the crybaby, because I think that's just bull, but you hear a lot of different things that happen in this country. They say, well, you had affirmative action. Affirmative action actually helped out more white women than black folks. If you think about it, who was able to step in when affirmative action kicked in mostly was white women. They were the benefactors of that at a greater level than black men were or than black women were. You can look that up statistically also. So there's a lot of things in this country that people get told that's not truth. But we have access to the internet now. We have access to information, and I say, be careful where you get your information from. Just because it's written on the internet doesn't mean it's true.
So you still didn't answer my question. You didn't get to that point.
What was your question?
So I'm going to go on my point of view of it. So yes, other people had it rough. I've been at the grave sites of my greats that were enslaved. We have the documents and their statements of their experience as slaves. No other culture in this country can stand before me and tell me that I have not earned my right to be a participant of this community that we call a nation, because their discomfort does not equate to my ancestry not having the ability to be human. They were livestock. They were people that were enslaved. So just because you had an uncomfortable trip or you were beat or you were everything that happened to them happened to my folks 100 times worse.
And not by choice.
For a longer period of time.
And it wasn't by choice.
Without a choice. Now, that I can sympathize and empathize with the struggles of others and because of that. But they cannot sympathize with the struggles of Negroes, colors, blacks, African Americans in this country. They can empathize, but they cannot sympathize.
Why is it a taboo issue to discuss race?
Because people are weak-minded. People are very fragile about that conversation because it's called cognitive dissonance. People don't want to address and talk about and fix or eradicate or give a reparation towards things that are considered non-important to them. We were considered 1/5 a human being.
3/5.
3/5 a human being at one particular time. And with that means that, like you were saying, if I am of a different culture, ethnicity group that happens to be from the European community, I am at least better than you.
Right.
So why would I want to change positions or you to change positions? Because it's almost like it's like livestock learning how to talk, learning how to speak, and then taking a civilized stance, and they're sitting on your couch. It's like, oh my goodness, the dog is on the couch sitting there asking for a cup of coffee.
Here's the problem. We know what propaganda is. We know what it is to subconsciously affect people. The intellectuals in America, I'm talking about the founding fathers, knew full well the existence. These guys were Masons. They knew the existence and the power of Africans who built the pyramids. They knew about Dahomey, and they knew about the universities. They knew about the Moors in Spain who stopped the Black Plague from happening. They knew that there was equality amongst people, but they sold this ideal to make slavery easier in America that these people were less. They also sold this ideal that said, as long as we're making them Christian, it's good. As long as their souls are going to a Christian God, it's all good. But here's part of the problem today.
I don't give them that much credit. I don't give them that much credit at all. It was ingenious that they created the system the way they did, the transatlantic slave trade, which was different from any other slave trade that in history.
Right.
But the thing was, it was all economics. It was economy. It was the ability to find free labor in order to get the maximum amount of out of whatever it is you're producing. So now
I don't want to take humanity away from certain people.
I am, because they took it from us. So they took it. They
can't take our humanity.
They took it from us. Slavery. You remember buck breaking, reading on those things, knowing that there were camps and there were places where they
can attempt to it, but the more they do that, the more inhumane they are. The more inhuman they become. That's the dirty trick of it.
What does that have to do with me? And look, let me make this statement. Regardless, whoever's listening, watching, and all this other stuff, regardless of anything, me and Brown, we are always going to be connected because we are able to have these conversations and not be disconnected just because we disagree on things, because we agree on more things than we disagree on, because we can't help but to. So these kind of interactions and dialogue with the community and with each other have to happen, and we have to stand on the common ground. Just because we don't agree on everything, he might like vanilla, I might like chocolate. He may like pork and I like lamb meat. But what does that have to do with the common denominator in which we have to focus on? So anyone that ever listens to this, from my perspective, I'm never going to say a negative thing or put something negative out in public about another person like me just because I disagree with them.
I, on the other hand, I'm going to make fun of Grundy when he wears bitch match socks.
Well, you can do that all day long, and I'll wear them every day.
But here in America, this is the biggest part of the problem that I see, and why race is so difficult to discuss. Nobody wants to admit that their father is a rapist. Nobody wants to admit that their mother was sexually assaulted, or that their mother, what's the right word, essayed, that their mother was essayed. We have in our community, and some people on 23andMe have found this out the hard way. Oh, you got good hair. You must got a lot of Indian in you. Oh, yeah, my grandmama was Cherokee and this, that, and the other thing. They take that 23andMe test, and unless this is being thwarted, a lot of people are finding out that it's not Native American blood that they're carrying, but they're actually carrying more European blood. And it's easier to tell children that they're mixed with Native American than it is to tell them that great-grandma got raped by master or essayed by master and this, that, another thing. It's hard for people to acknowledge. They say, because you have a lot of people say, I never owned a slave. Why should I pay reparations? I never did anything wrong to black folks. Why should I do this, that, another thing? As they sit inside the house on a plantation that was built by slaves, they inherited the wealth and never paid reparations for it. Imagine working 4 days without pay. Would you do it today? We worked over 400 years without pay, and we still waiting on that pay.
I can push back before you get too far from that point.
All right.
It's about the native part of it. So majority then of us are native. Now, look, we were here way before Columbus and others were over here. They came by mistake, if you remember.
Correct.
And when they wrote in their books and they gave us all of the descriptions from the Spanish conquistadors to Columbus to all those that wrote down in the book, what were the color of the people that they spoke on? They were either black or copper. They were dark or copper colored. They were more. They considered them more. So let's not get it twisted or confuse who we are in a general sense. Yes, there were hundreds, millions of Africans that were brought over, but I'm of the belief it was brought over for the same reason what we're dealing with now: confusion, not understanding where we stand and what our history is, being able to make universal admiralty and law of the land confusing, to say that you don't own this, to be able to make to do the DOS rolls where people could pay $5 and become considered Native American and then own the land. So anytime that anybody conquered any part of the world in general sense, in order to claim that land, they impregnated the women in order to have the children that had the due right of that land. And then they introduced the culture and the ideas that they brought in order to make sure that their ideals stood strong.
There's a movie that recently came out that touches on that. I think it's called Killing of the Flower Moon or something along those lines, where they talk
Never
about.
heard of it.
Well, it's a recent movie, and it's a all-star cast. Robert De Niro's in this movie also, and it's basically about Native Americans, indigenous people finding oil on their land, and all of a sudden it became the trendy thing for white men to marry these women, marry Native American women, get that percentage of their oil shares, and these women were suddenly coming up dead. Then this was en masse in the 20s at the same time that...
Was this based on a true story?
This is based on a true story.
So pretty much is saying that I'm right about what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm saying that you are right about what you're saying, but I'm saying that there are different times and different points in history where different things happen, and there are times when all of the stuff crashes at the same time. It's possible for us as a community to realize, all right, we share this common goal, we share this common history. We don't have to like apples, we don't have to like oranges, we don't even have to worship the same God, but we have to realize that we are one people with a set of needs that might differ from the mainstream, and we need to have not necessarily a lobbyist group, but we need to have a political exchange where we're not taken for granted by liberals, and where we're not just ignored by conservatives. At one point in time, most African Americans consider themselves conservative because of our religious upbringing and our religious background, and our stance on certain issues that include gender, that include work, that include a lot of other things. There's a lot of propaganda out there about who we are as black people. Black people are lazy. Then why did they make us slaves? Black people are nasty and disgusted. Then why were your great-grandparents being nursed by an African American woman? Why are you eating our food? Why were you the cooks in your kitchen and the maids in your homes if these stereotypes are true? Do I like chicken and watermelon? Hell yeah, I like chicken and watermelon.
Let me,
but black folks are scared to eat it in public.
look here.
Chinese are not scared to eat
So
rice
get
in
to the
public.
point. Get to the point, because
Okay.
we ain't got
The
it.
point is,
I'm gonna get to it.
we consider
Look
ourselves
here.
different.
Let me say this. So, and then I'm gonna leave it alone. So, for me, in my opinion, in order for us to have any kind of unity and to get to the point to where we have a stance and not just a bunch of verbal stuff, because take Flint for example, 10 years of talking about a water crisis, and this is a inter ethnic issue because it's a city that is diverse.
Right.
So in order for us to really do something, we have to go through the laws of the land, or the Constitution, and push policy and push legislation and get a seat at the table to be able to make sure that the law is in place to where we can give those that are in leadership the understanding that there are penalties based on what you do, because they don't fear anything that you say. They fear what they have to be obligated to, what they pay, what they hold homage and give a pledge to. So when you pledge something, tribunal law is real. There are people that go that you think are just sitting in retirement all the time that are no longer here because they violated tribunal law, and then they have to deal with that the way that the law says. if we don't do that, then we're always going to be a screaming, shouting, wonder why people. And we do have black coalitions and the Black Caucus and all these different things, but and the NAACP and the Urban League. But what did we allow to happen? And did we adjust the issues that were going on that we knew were wrong?
You named a lot of organizations, and some of those organizations have waned in power at the rubber to the road level.
Whose fault is that?
Well, this is what I'm saying. We need to get back to some basic premises. When the Japanese come to America, when the Chinese come to America, they do a generational thing. I can't remember what it's called. But the first generation, their job is to make sure that that next generation gets fed and educated. That next generation that gets educated and starts to make wealth, their job is to make sure the next generation
and they pay money to Congress in order to be able to have a voice.
We need to have an organization where we believe in family again, where we find that unity again, where that man across the street, even if he doesn't worship or eat the same way as me, he looks like me. His sons and daughters look like my sons and daughters. I want to protect his kids. I want him to want to protect my kids. We need to get that sense of community back where we become the bees.
So
let me just finish this real quick. When you attack one bee, what happens?
I don't know. You got to tell me.
If that bee releases a pheromone and it's on and popping, all those other bees are going to attack. You attack one bee. Now you step on one ant. They don't care. Now if you attack the nest of those ants, they come out in full force. That's how nations act. You invaded our space, we coming after you. We as black people, we don't attack or go after who attacked one of us. We sometimes don't even go after the people that invade our nest. We are almost like spiders just independently out there hoping for the best. Well, this is America and I can be independent if I want to. I don't have to agree with all the other black folks and whatnot. At some point in time, if you want to have your children have an existence and a future, we have to find some way, even if we can't agree, of getting together and understanding that we are more alike and share these common issues together and it's more important to have that than to be separate and to find reasons not to be alike. Well, you live on that side of town and I live on this side of the town. It shouldn't be about that. It should be, I want the best for my children, just like everybody else in America and the world wants the best for their children. I'm going to let you get the last word, Mr. Grundy, because I did cut you off. But if you have any last minute questions, we're almost hitting that 1 hour point.
So this your show. So I apologize. I talked to you about input. You said you didn't mind. So I told you it was going. I stated it before you.
I love the challenge.
So for me, I don't talk to people a lot about these issues because it's triggering for me because I don't like to. There's a lot of things that have to be hit that I have to digress in order to properly move in this world.
Well, but I think that this conversation needs to happen around the dinner table of black people. It needs to happen at the bar, at the barber shop, at the beauty salon. Black folks need to discuss, where are we going?
Period.
Not just talk about, you hear about Diddy lately. Sometimes there's stuff they put inside the mass media just to distract us from a serviceman being murdered by the police or from a state trooper running over a kid in Lansing. Sometimes they want to distract us, and it's that propaganda again, that machine that focuses on not us but whatever else is going on. Thank you, Siobhan. Go, cuz, and tell them. All right. Our next shows, or if you have any questions for future shows, please feel free to get in contact with Out of the Mud Productions, Mr. Grundy, or with me, Marcus Brown, ChessFrog OmniVersity, or ChessFrog Farms. Thank you again. We shall return next week. Same black time, same black channel. Deuces.